Hi, I'm David Dunlop. Welcome back to my studio. And I'm going to paint skies. Luminous, moving skies. Motion. Now that's something that skies are full of. They're very dynamic, and it's that sense of them ever changing, flittering by. That's what I want to catch. Now we know you can't count my fingers because they're moving. What are they? They're blurred when they're moving. And that's just what happens to anything that's moving fast. The faster it moves, the more it blurs. And so our brain perceives motion if it senses some blur. We also know that even from comic books that there are trailers or tracers that follow the figure. So it's as if you were using a sparkler on the 4th of July, and we would twirl the sparkler and you get these tracer effects, these trails of light. Well, that implies motion too. We see it visually happening. You've had the sparkler effect. You see it with headlights in cars. And we can see it in paint, and that's going to give a sense of animation and speed to the clouds. Now, before I do that, of course, I have to have a design. To work from the design, I need to react to something. I'm in the studio, I don't have a sky in front of me. I do have a variety of photographs. They're here. I can cull some ideas from those. And I'm going to be using an idea that I got from a painting I did earlier. Let me show you that painting now. The painting and the photos, by coincidence, were all taken near Etretat, the Normandy French coast, which is where we did one of our Landscape Through Time shows. Now, the landscape I looked at didn't look a thing like this. As you see, this doesn't resemble anything here. Because once I start to paint, I follow the paint. I let go of the idea that was initiating or triggering the painting. That disappears, and I disappear into the paint. But you can see that there's a lateral movement to this stroking, which suggests a lateral movement to the sky. And I've even tried to invest some motion into the landscape idea itself. The motif of the landscape, the trees, seem to be blurring in concert with the sky. Let's go into the design. Before I paint, always a design. We know from the 15th century, from Leon Battista Alberti in his Della Pittura, that disegno is first. It's the first thing you want to think about. So it doesn't matter if we were Claude, if we were Turner, if we were Constable, or if we were Da Vinci. We thought about the design. There's an ancient Chinese idea, principle, for creating a design, and it is 9 sketches, 1 completion. That is, test out a series of ideas in sketches. They will give you something that is more coherent and purposeful for your later painting. You still don't have to stay to it, but they will give you a sense of your options. So I'm going to do the same thing. I have a square format, and this is aluminum. And I have masked off the aluminum, as you saw in the picture I just showed you. And if I take a look, everything's a square. I'm going to go to a square. By the way, these pictures were not taken as squares. They were taken as horizontals. And inside of Photoshop, I compressed them like an accordion to make them into a square. So now I'm thinking, I look over this, I'm going to get some motion into this picture, and one thing to do is to angle the landscape itself. Rather than have the landscape be flat, that's more static, I'm going to angle the landscape. And of course I've got 2 options. I can angle it this way, or I can angle it this way. But for first sketch, remember 9 sketches, 1 completion, and it was because among the Chinese, 9 was a sacred number. And I start to think about the motion. Now, if I've got a motion that's going this way, I want a counterpoint motion. So something that would come up and reverse it like this. And if I did something in the landscape, I might do another reverse there. So if I'm going up, that means I have smaller to larger. That's just linear perspective. Smaller clouds down here, and they get bigger as they go up. It doesn't matter if it's water lilies, we'd reverse that. The bigger lilies in front, because the farthest territory from the viewer is back here along this horizon. And so the clouds would be smallest back there. And you see that I'm just doing iconic circles. I'm going to find an interesting shape. Now I've got that shape, and I'm thinking, should there be another shape? Maybe a shape that's coming in through here. An interesting shape, another shape down here. I don't want them putting side by side or I end up with glasses, right? There's Groucho Marx, there's two eyeballs, and we don't want a face because we as human beings have a propensity to see faces and bodies no matter what. And in clouds, which are ambiguous territories in the first place, it's one of the first things we start to project into something which has no real nameable identity. We see bodies in clouds, which is why we see ships and monkeys and all kinds of things in clouds, because of that ambiguity, because they don't contain a particular name. So you have to be careful not to trigger that mechanism that's our hypothesizing motor that's in our head to make it think, oh, there's a body, oh, there's a face. So I'm going to go to another square to try another square. Now I know I want something that's diving down. If I took the landscape this way, it echoes that dive. See that? That's why I'm going this way, because of the counterpoint. And when I get inside of that landscape, I thought I might do a path or something coming back into that landscape, kind of like you've seen in a Van Roysdale if you've seen another one of our cloud videos. And now I'm looking at getting ideas. Woo! Thinking about how I'll divide up this space and how this will go. Now I could have an echoing hill back here, but that levels it out too much. And I could just do tall grasses here so that I go bigger to smaller in terms of scale of the vegetation. That gives us a sense of perspective too. But the leading in of the path, I think, does a better job. Just make sure your path turns in some reciprocity with what's happening here. But not a twin. That becomes suspicious. And we have an abhorrence of suspicious coincidence. We know that from V.S. Ramachandran. I'm going to make this sketch, even though we haven't done 9, you've got the idea that it's multiples, a little more graphic. So I'll just fill in and I'll fill in I'm testing shapes. Now it's just black and white. And that gives me something to push off of. It's a trigger, but it's not something I'm going to necessarily follow, but it gives me a springboard. This is where I launch. And we'll put the markers away and put out some paint. I'm going to use all sizes of brushes. This is a 6-inch brush. And it's a synthetic, very soft brush. I'm going to need a way to neutralize the color with ultramarine blue. There's some ultramarine blue. Put that down here in my beautifully organized palette. And it looks like the Taj Mahal after a bombing or on fire. And I'm going to pick up some brushes, 3-inch brush, 2-inch brush, 6-inch brush, whoa, 4-inch brush, and a 1-inch brush. That kind of gives me a selection of the kind of brushes I'll be using. And I'm going to just hold them here while I look for an iron oxide. If I mix these two colors together, I get a neutral gray. If I put a red, well, this manufacturer calls it French red light. It's kind of a vermilion quality. It's a little less opaque than cadmium red. A light blue. I've called it an azurite blue. It's a much brighter than cerulean. And a little bit of this gamboge yellow. Let me put these brushes down. And titanium white. My medium, my oil, is down here now. and I put a little oil on the brush, and I'm grabbing some white paint, which I'm going to take from here. Always put your finger into the white or a palette knife into the white, or I have gloves so I can put my finger into the white. And then take this dollop of white. Oh, so it looks like a turban on the end of my finger. Take this dollop of white, put it somewhere else, and mix some color into it like this. Now I've got this iron oxide mixed into it, and if I wanted to neutralize it a little bit, you see it's darker down here because this has more white. And I'll just brush on a big hunk of it in a cavalier way. So what do? I've got this idea, I've got that big cloud shape that's kind of moving out like this. I'm not going off that corner, I'm going off this corner. No, yes. The 6-inch brush, you see how nicely it smooths out on a very, very fast surface. That's the one thing about aluminum is it's like painting on glass. It's so fast. And a little bit more down here. I can play with what happens now. I'll put that brush down. The 6-inch brush goes down. Paintings are about design and light and dark. I have a friend who said, values do all the work. In fact, his name's Dan Nelson, but color gets all the credit. So I'm going to think about this as light and dark. I also am thinking about that motion. And if I tip the plane, incline the plane, the picture plane, this is considered the picture plane. If I tip it, that vertiginous effect, that off-balance effect, creates a sense of motion in the viewer. And I'm the primary viewer, you're the secondary viewer. So I next need to think about how I sustain that inclined plane and offer contrast with a sense of motion. Now I'm not going to use the same brush because it was a light brush. It would be polluted and I just get a gray. I want something dark, so I'll switch to a darker brush. And it's a 4-inch brush. And I go back into the oil, grab a bunch of paint, and as you can see, I've done this before on my easel as a handy palette. Basically, I'm painting on the walls. That started early with me, I guess. I had a generous mother who, when we ran out of finger paint, she said, just paint all over the top of the Formica kitchen table. And I guess I've never stopped. So here we go. A little more oil. Make it flow. It's a little green. With the gamboge into the blue, it's a little green against this little bit peachy pink, even though it's a browny pink, but it has a little red cast to it. That is a complementary difference. So, swoosh. Now, when you're applying the brush, think of exhaling. Because whether you're shooting a bow or a gun, or you're bowling, anything that requires a relaxed concentration will have a more effective motion, a more accurate motion, if you do it on the exhale. Don't do it holding your breath. Exhale, and everything will be more relaxed. I'm trying to create an interesting pattern. So my wiggle, I don't want it to be too repetitious. If it's too repetitious, the pattern is too regular, you will find it suspicious and say, that doesn't seem like a reasonable or natural landscape to me. Now I'll lighten it by mixing the two together right here. They found a middle ground. The great diplomat in art was Peter Paul Rubens. Negotiated contracts and treaties between kings of Europe. So he was trying to find the common ground in both his landscape paintings and in, now, you see how this goes light to dark, and we're beginning to get some recession. I'll put down the dark brush. It's the dark brush. You stay there. And I'll step back and think, now, this is what's so essential about painting. 90% of painting is without a brush in your hand. That's what Edward Manet said. That's why Rembrandt, when he does his self-portrait, a portrait of an artist at work, and all you see is him with his hands at his side, and we see the back of the painting so that you know it's an intellectual activity. So what I do is I walk over to where you are and I look at the painting. Now, in this studio, I have a very comfortable chair at about 20 feet away from this easel, where I spend a lot of my time napping. No, taking a look at the picture and thinking about what possibilities does it have. Because I need to make this all small so I see it at one time. And the farther I walk back, the smaller this gets. And as I look and think about something else, I look at another picture in this studio and forget this picture, I'm likely to have an insight, a new insight. And the reason I have the new insight is because I forgot about this picture. When I get back to painting this picture, in other words, when I get back from walking over here, and I mean we're way back from the picture, I can say, oh, so that's what it looks like. Now, I'll make decisions about this painting from over here, not up there, because I can't see the whole picture. We tend to think and look telescopically. We read telescopically. We read all of our words. We look at everything and we see spot, 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 spot. Oh, there's a fox. Oh, there's a leaf I like. Where did I park my car? We don't see the whole parking lot. And that's what you need to do when you're painting. You need to relax to see the whole. And when you're up close, you're just painting little parts of your picture. So back here is a chance to do this overall assessment, which will enhance the possibilities of future coherence in your painting. Let's go back. My director, Connie Simmons, has just said, where are you going next with your brush so I can follow you with the camera? And my answer is, I don't know. Now, I can oblige her by saying, oh, I'll be going here. And she'd be very happy because she knows where to focus. But as my brush approaches here, I'll have an idea about, well, no, I think I wanted to go down here. And this painting process, since I've disappeared into the act of playing the music, I forget all of that and just respond to the next notes in the music, what will make the music work. The other thing that happens is I'm painting and I look at this, as I start to ask myself, and I don't even ask, it just comes up, and I say, oh, that reminds me of a painting. That reminds me of one of de Kooning's skies, or that reminds me of one of Constable's skies. And once that starts to happen, I find myself reacting to their model in terms of this painting. Because I have a Pictionary in here. And that Pictionary, like you have a vocabulary, a dictionary, you have a Pictionary. And that's always going to inform the schematic, which is what this is, because it's not a sky. It's paint meant to trigger the sensation of sky. I think I'd like some more light. And so I'm going to wipe some of this down, scoop up a bunch more white, and go over here to an unused part of my easel. Isn't it fun to paint on an easel? Because the paint stays flat, you're not getting a lot of big chunks on the easel, so you can continue to put things on the easel. Now that's pretty white, a little bit more oil, so that the paint will go on top of the dark paint. And just kind of see how what happens is the hand is dancing. And again, the Chinese say, the hand can't dance without an idea. So you have to have an idea for the hand to dance. And we'll let the brush flow. Give me ideas. Give me ideas. More ideas, please. Oh, this is fun. If it stops being fun, if the act of painting becomes one of doubt, self-doubt, an uncertainty of, oh, I don't know what to do next. Oh, I don't know how to make that work. Stop painting. Because you only want to paint when you're enthused, when you're able to disappear, when you're able to transcend yourself in the conditions. You just have disappeared and you're not self-conscious. Self-conscious means you're trying to tidy up and fix, which means you're not going to have a very good painting. You're going to have a disaster. Now, I like to have songs just spontaneously, just as other designs pop into my head, so do songs. And then with a big sky painting, it's peculiar, and I think it was Irving Berlin. Give me land, lots of land, under starry skies. And of course, everything I'm doing is amplifying my sense of the space. The music I'm putting on in my head is amplifying this space so that there's a psychological coherence in everything I'm doing. Now, I think I'll try some other color, another complementary color to this. And then we'll move the paint around some more. This is a very plastic surface. As you have seen, I can go this way with it, I can go that way with it, I can muck it up all I want. I'm not married to anything. I'm not trying to make something resemble a particular place so much as I am trying to evoke a psychological condition of motion and space conveyed through my feelings about sky. More white. More white. More white, more white. And you. This light blue, it's called Schevening blue light. And I'm mixing a value of blue, and I'm evening it out on my brush so that the brush is completely just that blue. You saw in the beginning it was a variety of colors, but now it's all uniformly that blue. The lighter blue here, the darker blue here, the transition of lighter to darker, because the sun is over here. And to just play with the shape a little, I'm going to play with my paper towel. And see what can happen when I play with my paper towel. See, I'm making shapes. If this were the same height as this, and this is lower, and this is higher, and this is more directly below it, but if this were here, and this were here, and this were moved to here, I'd have a face. So I'm trying to throw things off so that I don't. Now, the aluminum itself being so gray, even though it is much more reflected than the white ground of a canvas, wants to eat the color and subdue the color. So I don't get as much color out of my first application of the paint. And sometimes I will let it, frequently, I'll let it dry and put in other applications of paint later. But here we're going to do it alla prima, the fancy Italian way of saying all at once, all at the first. Just increasing the value a little bit there. Let's see. A lighter blue down in here. More white. A little more white. A lighter blue. And I'm blending that. Remember what I said about motion. See, it feels like it's more mobile because it's blurred. And we'll carry that on down even further, maybe over in here. Oh, maybe one more down in here. So I'm going boing, 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 boing in a way that is a serpentine snaking movement. It's a way to get a neural scan path that will have you go from these shapes, these spots, and they'll create a continuum from this transition of value that will lay behind this shape, which is also doing this. So we have this shape taking this serpentine pattern, which locks the left and the right together. A serpentine pattern will always do that. Look, watch my fingers. If I don't have a serpentine pattern, I just have two edges, one edge, two edges, and they come together like this, there's no interlock. No matter how I tilt it, there's no interlock. But a serpentine pattern happens when I do this. Now I've got an interlock. And that keeps the two sides coherent, unified in one design, one pattern. We have an appetite for coherence. We fabricate coherence. You can sit in the cafe and watch people walk along by and you're listening to music and they seem to be walking to the music. It's something we human beings do. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate in economics, who has written about the phenomena of how we make decisions, notices that we have this unstoppable appetite for coherence. However, there are things that thwart our ability to find coherence. This thwarts it. This enhances it. Some fresh paper towels. And now a little more light, and then some deeper blues. So I'll go back to my whiter brush, scoop up the white, go over here with it, add a little bit of oil, which will help it stay on the top and not be blended into the colors that are below. When you're using a big brush, I don't use the whole thing. I might just use this much of the brush, or that much of the brush, or that much of the brush, or even just a few hairs of the brush to get something else to happen. Just because the brush is 6 inches doesn't mean you use all 6 inches of it. Freshen up the white, because it picks up other color and you need to reinvigorate that white. It's not actually white because you notice it has a little pink to it too. I'm not using a pure white. It's just whiter. And blur. This is going to be the bluer, darker blue brush. It's going to go in here and That's green. Boo. This is that color blue. So I'm going to just invest it with a little deeper tone, maybe a little bit more of this. Another 4-inch brush, by the way, and a new one. A little bit of oil. And I'm going to test this color out on the blue tape to see how it looks. Really dark. That's good. I want a nice strong blue because the contrast of this sky being dark and this cloud being light, as opposed to the sky being light and the cloud being dark. See down here? Sky light, cloud dark. Up here, the sky is going to be dark and the cloud light. That reversal of the roles of the cloud and the sky is a principle. It's a Renaissance principle, and the principle is called the principle of interchange. John Ruskin talks about it in his Elements of Drawing. So something deeper, much deeper. There it goes. Am I blue? You'd be too. Light touch and exhale. Blend. So it goes from lighter to darker. Unify that shape. Do I want to poke a hole in it here? Or do I want to poke a hole in it from that way? I don't know. I'm going to need to stand back and make that decision from about 10 feet away. But I know I want a darker blue over here at the top. So we can go over there now. Don't make it parallel, so come down below. I think I want some more values to modulate in the clouds themselves. So I'm going to put down that blue brush and pick up a different brush. Test the color that's already on this brush. Go to walnut oil, wipe off the brush, put up more white, and not that I'm going over to here, and I'm going to make a darker color right in here. Just a darker color. Steal something of you. And a little bit of you. This is how you get a neutral. Remember this. See those two colors together creating a neutral? And if I want that neutral flavored red, I'll go just a little bit that way. And that's pretty dark. And I really don't know how dark it is until I get it over to the painting itself. Because what looks dark over here on this part of the palette is different when it gets over here. Because we register everything comparatively. A little bit darker. How dark can you go? See, I'm picking up little bits at a time. Being able to perceive nuance is half the battle. I mean, that's one of the hardest things to do, is to control the values, because it's like flying a plane. A little bit too much rudder and woo! Not that I fly a plane. And as this gets darker up here, it moves forward to the viewer. Feel it moving forward as I make that a little darker? Darker. Moving forward, a little bit darker. This is just too much fun. Darker, not dark enough to do a Vincent Price laugh, but it's tempting. I hear one in my head. But it's a way of motivating me to use more dark. Now, not as dark, so I come back up here. Not as dark. See, darker, not as dark. See, not as dark. It doesn't look so different because the transition is gradual. But if I take this value and put it down here, you go, whoa, there's a big difference. But because it's such a gradual transition, we don't perceive the difference. So that's putting a little underbelly of shadow. The clouds are getting a shadowy side. It's a soft side. Do you see how these edges have some edges dissolving, some edges are harder? Heinrich Wölfflin calls that open-closed form. It gives the shape more volume if one side is closed or more linear edge and the other side is softer, a more dissolved edge. Because painting, as he pointed out, is about areas, not about lines. Because we guess what things are, and you want to just get the guessing going. And the ratio of difference between light and dark diminishes as we go farther away into space. The farther back in the picture, the farther back I go, the ratio of difference between values is closer. I'm going to push more of the sky down into here. Down we go. See, I've got my thumb way down on you. You have more control on the brush when you're way down here. And flutter. See how it looks like I've got a foreground and a background just because of two different values? This is a 2-inch brush. Tiny little thing, 2-inch brush. Just some more variety so that it's different from what's happening over there. I want some difference. This brush, which had been this light brush, is still a light brush. So it can be employed for light purposes. And I'm going to take you over there and a little bit of you, the gamboge yellow, and I'm going to mix you two together. I am killing the yellow. I don't want it to be too strong so that it will go back in space. Too strong, the saturation is too high, then it tends to approach the viewer. decrease the saturation of the color, and it recedes into space. And now I'm going to ratchet, that is, one territory, this territory, which is clearly bigger trees than smaller things, bigger flora, smaller flora, must be closer, must be further. Let's give it another hint that it is closer and farther. So I'll do a little bit of a wiggle so that we look like we have a textured surface. Lighter here than here. Draws our attention to the back. Desaturate the color even more. Maybe turn the brush on its side. Maybe just use a corner of the brush. A corner of the brush, see? A corner of the brush. And while this is here, I'm going to lift this to go back into here. See how you go back into that space now? And back into here, back through. And I'm turning the brush as I'm going. Now let me show you over here so you can see what I'm doing in order to get that turning curve thing to happen. If I touch the brush here first, and then as I come down, you see how it creates that turn. As I apply the brush, slowly increasing it as I come this way. And you notice where my finger is. It's right here on the end of the bristle. It starts there, and then I start to push more of the brush. More of this brush comes into play. We end up getting this curve, which I did slowly right here. It could be done in the reverse. So as the paint is laid down here, you can come back up here and pick it up there. Or create even more of it. And I can try cross-hatching some of these lines. Although as I do this, I think, oh, I like the vertical pattern that is happening here. I'm going to make it a smaller gesture right here. I'm just making the marks smaller. And I'm lifting up from the bottom of the brush. See how there's very little of the brush touching? Now, what happens is, you think, oh, there's a path. So your brain says, I must paint the path. No, you paint the space around the path and a path appears. You paint the space around and the sky appears, or the clouds appear. You don't need to paint them with intention. They will show up by default. And now I'll put little bits of light pattern coming in through here, just dancing along there so that they catch a little light. On the sides of the flora and the trees. Skipping and dancing. Skip, dance, skip, dance. To create a little more interest in there. It isn't, you know, that's such a cliche. I'm not creating interest. I'm generating textures that are ambiguous and have an unfinished enough quality so that you can guess there's something. That's what I'm doing. And that something is unfinished is key. Samir Zeki, who is a neuroscientist in London, one of the world's foremost neuroscientists, has written about the brain, has done lots of research on the brain, and has devoted a book to how we perceive beauty and where it shows up in the brain. One of the things he notices is that the extent to which something is unfinished is the extent to which we start to fill in, we supply other possibilities. And it is the supplying of other possibilities that makes for beauty. That we can see several different sorts of things here, that I can see that it's paint, that I can see that it could be trees, that I could see that it could be distance, it could be something else. So he liked the unfinished Michelangelos, the unfinished Turners, because they had more possibility built into them. Now, as I soften or complicate the textures, in other words, cross-hatch, do varieties of other things to them, I can create different feelings. The more I fine-tune it, the more I foreclose on possibilities. So the tighter or more linear the painting gets, the less possible it is for the painting to be many things. And that's when you stop sustaining your looking. Let's go back up to the sky section. I'm using this big hunky brush again for the white. I don't just go from a big to a smaller and smaller brush. I'm going back to the biggest brush. Now I'm going to give a little bit of that indefinite rhythm and pattern so that I have more variety in the strokes and more ambiguity in that space. And it's just fun to touch the paint. Like a piano player, it's just fun to touch the piano. The more I touch and give pattern here, the slower the painting, so I slow the speed of the sky. If I keep the long strokes going here, I keep the speed faster. So I can slow the sky down or speed it up depending on how much variety I give in the movement here. As I take away the long linear stroke and break it up with lots of little subcomponents of movement, little bitty motions inside of it, it slows the painting down. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, because at this point, all I'm caring about is it's a fun thing to do. I'm not sure how to look, I just know it's a fun thing to do. And the act of painting is the reason you paint, because it's a fun thing to do. Not to give it away or to sell it or to make a living or to get an award. You do it because it's just fun. Little bits of flying sky just flitting around here. I'm just bearing that touch so that there can be some other quality in this. Some other qualities of ambiguity. Something a little brighter in here, maybe. Remember, there's smaller shapes down here. Why are they smaller? Because they're farther away. And that's one of the constants that we have, is that things scale shift to be smaller. Two things the same size, two elephants, when separated by 200 yards of distance, one elephant looks very small, like a toy. The other one, who is only 10 feet away, looks very big. And yet they're the same size if we were to measure them. Well, that's how clouds and everything else works. Do I need to break up this space? I'm whispering to let you in on the secret. This is so much fun. back to this blue brush. Now you recall, I said earlier, don't find yourself fixing. Only find yourself at play and confident that you know what you want to do with the melody. You know how you want to improvise on the melody. You're having all kinds of ideas about improvising on the melody. And you just can't wait to try them. When you're exhausted of that, stop painting, because you're not going to improve it. Because you're not going to improve it. You're going to overwork it. And since the ancient Greeks, Apelles, 2,600 years ago, warned us, you can overwork a painting. And I am talking to you. I just don't want this line to be too twin-tracked with this, so I'm breaking up this little bit of space right there. And we'll stretch it out. As I said, because it's aluminum, there's a certain grayness to it. And if I take long strokes, I can go back and blur in the motion. Give me more of that motion because we wanted that motion. That was what we advertised this cloud thing to be about. It's that motion. Let's keep it going. If I got a little fussy, then I'll unfuss it by just smoothing it out. Interestingly, Gerhard Richter, the world-renowned Gerhard Richter, said when he gets to that point at which he finds he would like to give it more motion, he just blurs it. And he finds that it gives it coherence and it disguises all of his errors. I'm going to go to a little deeper blue. I don't know, are you? Oh, okay. And we'll go back up here because I thought, oh, we could get a deeper blue up here and that would give me more space. There, see? More space. Oh. Be still, my heart. More space. Now I'm going to go down here. And because of my particular height, this is a long way down, and I really can't see what's going on. So I have a device, this ergonomic chair, which, as you can see, has seen better years. It takes the weight off my back, and it's mobile, so I can come down here and consider what's in here from a different elevation. I can either raise this up or come down here, and this is, of course, more comfortable if you've just been standing for a while. And I may now go to a smaller brush. Look at there, smaller brush, 1 inch. Still a very soft, synthetic, flat. And a 2 inch. Let's look for a 2 inch. There's a 2 inch. We'll oil them both up. Put them in the medium. Now I'm putting this on both brushes. A little bit of green in it by putting that blue in it. It's a little Poggendorf illusion. A continuum that you thread as one. Test the color over here. Now, among the ancient Chinese, everybody would develop a personal stroke. Van Quan had the broken rain dot stroke. He used many strokes. He had a broad vocabulary of strokes. Monet says if you improve the vocabulary of strokes, you improve the appearance of your paintings. You want that kind of diversity. And now I'm pulling the brush down at this point. Your eye tends to go back to the light. let these two meadows start to connect. I'm going to splay the hairs on this brush like that. The Chinese had thousands of kinds of strokes. Unraveling rope stroke, the rain dot stroke, the broken rain dot stroke. And each artist would become known for a particular stroke if they invented a stroke. And splay them on this brush. My son, who paints with me as well, Max Dunlop, says I have what he now calls the dragon tail stroke. So I can create some variety in these textures. And the more variety there is, the more it will serve as a better surrogate for evoking the complexity of the grass on a meadow. I'm losing the stylized effect I had by using that brush stroke earlier, but gaining this complexity. And I'm not going to totally eliminate some of that cross stroking. See, I've turned this into a smaller brush. And they get taller. And this is a perspective thing as they come forward. Now they feel like vertical grasses laying on a flatter plane. Steal from this paint that's off to the left here. I could do the same with this smaller brush. What I'm doing is I'm kind of converting it into a semi-fan. Take your attention back. And then run contrary to the pattern that I called the dragon tail stroke earlier. I'm revealing bits of the metal, which will make the reflectance of light quite pronounced in here. And if I were to glaze over that later to bring another quality of coherence to it, but with a unifying glaze, I would have to let this paint dry. Because to put the glaze, no matter how soft you touch, would eliminate all of these little textures. So I would just want to color these textures, to tint these textures with the glaze. Now, we'll go across here too with just some more variety, but this plane lays flat. It just has more variety in it now than it had a minute ago. And I can cross-hatch some motion in this territory too. Then I'll go up to here with the same 2-inch brush and start to play with the textures in here, just make them a little more confused. Because the confusion, the chaos, is an easy thing to guess into. It's easier to guess into that chaos than in the blended stroke I had before. We guess into all chaos. we say it tastes like chicken. So this confusion, this textural difference, has more variegation, more pattern than it had a bit ago. But it also slows the motion down. But in contrast to the fast-moving sky, it makes the sky appear to be moving faster as this moves slower. That's curious. These are vertical and this is horizontal, creates a tension, a T-intersection, a T-junction as they call it. And when this gets more complicated and vertical against this being smoother, this appears to be moving faster. Remember, it's relative difference. We only know which train is moving when we look out the window by which occupies the largest visual field. So, if you're looking out the window and you're looking at your train and the other train and you can't tell which one is moving and which one is static, you try to feel your body. Am I feeling anything? Because it can be a little bit discomforting to be uncertain. Maybe you've had this happen. It's because your brain can't decide which is the dominant visual field. And that indecision is what I'm trying to exploit right here without going to a railroad station. Although lots of artists like to paint railroad stations, including me. Monet got famous for his paintings of Gare Saint-Lazare, and so did Manet. He'd like to paint the atmosphere of all that steam, that amorphous steam, billowing out of those engines. And of course today, one of those famous stations has become a famous museum, the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. Worth a visit. We'll put some darks in here now. See, I'm going to one area and I'm stealing dark to put it into another area, just to create a little more variety down in here. Holds onto the corner with that difference. Now I'll step back and take a look and see what kind of contrast do I have. Well, that's a better foreground. And it lets the sky look as though it's moving faster. Now I think I'm going to remove the masking and see how this painting floats. The aluminum mask that's going to be surrounding the image has an interesting effect. It either propels the image forward or lets it sink back, so the image seems to hover in space. Now, I have played with these colors and had to stop for a curious reason. Paint, when you add it, you subtract light. When you subtract the paint, you add light. So adding paint is a way of making a picture darker and chalkier and duller. And if I keep mixing the paint, that's going to be more pronounced. So I want to stop to prevent that from happening. You don't get brighter colors by continuing to mix colors. You get less color. Cleans up an edge. And the other interesting experience here is that as the edge is cleaned up, the image, the painted image, becomes more autonomous. And what you saw as the paint flowing off the edges onto the tape now disappears as evidence of paint and becomes just evidence of an illusion. Less evidence of just the paint. I look forward to seeing you next time here in my studio. I'm David Dunlop.